My name is Ma, and until I turned 33, the most exciting event in my life was when the accounting firm I worked for switched from PCs to Macs. Not exactly thrilling, right? But then everything changed at a friend's birthday party. That night, I stood in the corner of a cramped living room, holding a soda and feeling uncomfortable in my too tight dress. The music was loud, way too loud for talking, but perfect for him, Charles. He was taller than most people, which is probably why he noticed me. He walked over with a confidence that made my heart skip a beat. "Hey, you're Ma, right?" His voice was clear even over the loud bass. Yeah. And you are?" I sipped my drink, trying to look calm. "Charles, I've seen you around. Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just stood next to me. "Not at all," I said, my voice nearly drowned out by the latest pop song blaring through the speakers. "So, Ma, what brings you here tonight?" he asked, leaning in. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intense. "Just here to celebrate Jessica's birthday. You know her long?" "Yeah, went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things. Can't say no, can I?" We laughed, and it felt natural, easy. "I get it. I work with her. She's kind of hard to say no to." "An accountant, right?" She mentioned it. He nodded like he already knew. "That's right. Numbers are my game," I joked, even though I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. "Sounds thrilling." He grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or not. "Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world." We laughed again, and I felt at ease talking to someone genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was new, exciting, and a bit scary. "You want to grab some air?" he suggested, nodding toward the backyard. I nodded, grateful to escape the noise. Outside, the cool air was a relief. "So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just looking for a good time, I guess. And maybe someone cool to hang out with," he said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books we liked, how he was into graphic design but stuck in a corporate job he didn't love. It felt like we'd known each other for years. As the night wound down, he pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again, Ma." I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. "Sure," I said, typing my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. "Great, I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us." "Sounds good." I managed my stomach doing flips. I watched him go, a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 33 wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it was just the start of something truly great. The days after Charles' call felt like a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date, my nerves all over the place since I didn't have much experience in this area. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but I hoped it would do the trick. Charles picked me up at 7 sharp in his clean, well-kept setting. Nothing flashy, but it suited him perfectly. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that could knock you sideways. "You look great, Ma," he said. "Thanks," I mumbled, probably blushing like a tomato. "You look nice too." Dinner was at a cozy little French place he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing somersaults. We ordered pasta, him with some fancy sauce and me with plain old marinara. "So, Ma, tell me something about you that no one else knows," he said, twirling his spaghetti expertly onto his fork. I chuckled, playing with my food more than eating it. "Well, I'm pretty boring, but I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute." He raised his eyebrows. "Really now? That's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime." "Sure," I said, starting to relax a little. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "Best you'll ever have." "I'll take your word for it. Maybe you can prove it sometime," I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other constantly. Charles would come over after work, and I'd meet him for lunch near his office. He showed me his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things took a serious turn when he invited me to meet his parents, Brian and Camille. They lived in a small, cozy house full of photos and little decorations. Camille hugged me the second we walked in. "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. She's lovely, Charles said, and I could tell he was pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was non-stop. So, Ma, Charles tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting, Brian said, passing me the potatoes. It has its moments, I replied with a smile. Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it. And how's your family? Camille asked, genuinely interested. They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me. It was all happening fast, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this moment, meeting Charles and feeling like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant. One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights reflected off the water in a postcard-perfect way. Maud, I've been thinking, he started, stopping and facing me. Yeah? I asked, my heart starting to race. I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but will you marry me? Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple, yes, Charles, I'll marry you. The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Charles to my father. He took to Charles immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. He's a good man, Ma, Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down. It picked up pace. Charles and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss before he suggested something big. Hey Ma, I've been thinking, he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. How about we move in with my folks? I paused, holding a coffee mug in my hand. Live with your parents? He nodded, looking serious. Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if they were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent. It made sense, but moving in with the in-laws, that was sitcom territory. Are you sure they'd want us there all the time? Absolutely, he assured me. Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good. 3 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a bunch of boxes. Charles's mom, Camille, was waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. Oh, Ma, we're so thrilled to have you both here, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Brian, Charles's dad, clapped him on the back. Welcome home, son, and you too, Ma. The house was cozy, stuffed with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, the Museum of 1973. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Charles sensed my hesitation. It's going to be great, you'll see, he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Camille was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. Just making sure you're comfortable, she chirped while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner, Charles, me, Brian, and Camille. The conversation was painfully mundane until Charles dropped another bomb. So the house needs some major repairs, he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. I choked on my mashed potatoes. Repairs. Yeah, the roof's a mess and the plumbing's from the dark ages, he said. Brian nodded solemnly. We were thinking, Charles continued, avoiding my gaze, that maybe we could all chip in for the costs. I glanced at Camille, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. All of us. Well, I just got this pay cut at work, Charles muttered, so I'm a bit strapped at the moment. There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I'll see what I can do, I managed to say, even though I wanted to say much more. Camille perked up, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Ma, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel. The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Camille gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Brian slapped me on the back. You're really part of the family now, Ma. Part of the family, sure, the part that pays for everything. One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive renovations, I felt the strain more than ever. I felt completely drained as I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Charles came in and sat beside me. Thanks for handling all this, Ma, he said, sounding almost sincere. It's fine, I lied, staring at the ceiling. I just didn't realize how much it would be. He squeezed my hand. It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right? Our future, I echoed, not sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there, listening to Charles' steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep and had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories, when Camille suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy. She looked at Brian, then at us, her eyes teary. "We need to tell you both something important," she said, her voice shaky. Charles and I exchanged looks. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Brian took a deep breath. "The house, it's mortgaged. Heavily mortgaged. We owe $300,000, and the bank could take it away if we don't settle the debt in 3 months." My fork clattered to my plate. "What? You mean all the repairs we just paid for?" Camille started sobbing. We were ashamed and thought we could manage it. But after the repairs and everything, there's just no way. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, and it was for a house that wasn't even secure. "So what are you saying now?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "Well," Charles started, his eyes avoiding mine. "I was hoping maybe, Ma, you could talk to your father." "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Ask my dad for $300,000? It's just, after his help, the house would be secure for us. For our future," Charles pleaded. Camille's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. "Please, Ma, it's our home. We've spent decades in this house." I was furious, but the tears and the pleading wore me down. "I'll think about it," I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad, hesitantly explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. "I'll give the money, Ma, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented." When I told Charles about my dad's condition, he wasn't happy. "Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us?" "It's $300,000, Charles. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious," I argued, feeling the distance between us grow. "He'll get his paperwork," Charles muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up and the money was transferred. Camille and Brian were relieved, constantly thanking me, but the air between Charles and me had changed. There was a coldness that hadn't been there before. Just when I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck. "Ma, it's Kayla." A voice came through the line, shaky and choked. "Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad." My heart dropped to my stomach. "What? How is he?" "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "No, that can't be right," I mumbled, numb. I hung up and turned to find Charles standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "My dad? He's gone," I managed to say before everything inside me broke and I started sobbing. Charles came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and dealing with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key to the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Charles, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. "I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. It's too much," Charles complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, "You have to hold on a bit longer, Charles. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Ma has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them, and then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about." Charles's voice was cold and calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was mourning my father, while the people I thought I could trust were plotting behind my back. They weren't the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as a way to fix their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I slammed the door loudly, as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. "Oh, Ma, you're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans?" Camille's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with fake innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. It's all coming together, thanks for asking. As I spoke, I could see the quick glances they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl knowing their true colors, but I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Charles' parents' house, the true colors became even clearer. As we gathered in the living room sipping on lukewarm coffee, the family I married into began to show their true colors. Charles's demeanor shifted, his usual charming facade crumbling away to reveal something more sinister. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. "Ma, pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now, someone better." His words should have felt like a slap, and I pretended to be stunned. Before I could respond, Camille chimed in with a snide giggle. "We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money." "What about the house?" I asked, feigning disbelief. "The house that I paid to fix. The $300,000 I poured into it." Camille laughed harder as if I had told the best joke of the year. "Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here." Charles's smirk widened. "And those receipts you're so proud of? Found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone." For a moment, I let them believe they had won, but then I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter, my reaction confusing them, their smiles faltering. "Why are you laughing? What's so funny?" Charles demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever? The receipts you destroyed were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer." The color drained from their faces. Charles's arrogance turned to panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. "I can, and I will," I shot back, my voice steady and firm. "Now, I want my money back. All of it, or my next call is to the police." Charles and Brian looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Brian, usually so bold and brash, began to plead. "Ma, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out." With the truth out and leverage in my hands, negotiations with Charles and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. "Look, it's simple," I stated firmly during one of our many discussions at their now legally mine kitchen table. "The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the money. That's the deal. No more games." Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. "I want no corners cut," I emphasized. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Charles's mother, who looked deflated yet still carried a hint of her former haughtiness. "I'll be keeping these in a safe place," I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder, just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Charles was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched Charles, his mom, and dad carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Charles and his situation. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce, and his parents were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a big downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. It seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life or, at least, my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating to cut the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, As I was enjoying the quiet moment with a book in my living room, there was a knock at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Charles standing there, a pathetic figure holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. "Really, Charles? Flowers?" He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. "Ma, I've realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong." "Remember when you told me I disgusted you?" I interrupted, leaning against the door frame, not hiding my amusement at his discomfort. "What changed, Charles? Run out of options?" He looked down, the shame clear on his face. "I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right." I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. "Almost. You're not here to make things right, Charles. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore. Not for you." His face fell, and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. "Ma, please." "Save it," I cut him off sharply. "I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done. Forever." Charles stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. I returned to my book, feeling a sense of finality and relief. I smiled to myself, feeling the quiet of the house wrap around me like a comforting blanket. It was such a stark contrast to the chaos that once filled this space. The constant noise, the tension, the deceit, all of it was gone now. I could finally breathe deeply without the weight of worry on my chest. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms. I glanced around the room, taking in the calm atmosphere. The sun streamed in through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. I realized how much I loved this house now that it was truly mine. The walls, once witnesses to arguments and schemes, now seemed to echo with serenity and contentment. I thought back to the days of turmoil and manipulation, remembering how trapped I felt. Charles and his family had taken so much from me, both emotionally and financially. But now they were out of my life for good. No bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could change that. Their attempts to manipulate me were over. As I sipped my tea and returned to my book, I felt a sense of triumph. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I had come out stronger on the other side. I had taken control of my life and my future. The peace I felt now was well-earned and deeply cherished. I was truly finally free. Free from lies, free from deceit, and free to live my life as I chose. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities and opportunities. I smiled again, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready for it. Head back home, you penniless, unemployed hag. What's the scam with you tagging along on this trip, Gretties? My disappointment in my family was as predictable as ever. Well, I'll give them a taste of their own medicine. While reveling in some solitary moments away from their company, I resolved to take matters into my own hands. Just then, my brother's voice chimed in on the phone. "Hey, what's going on, sis? What have you done?" "My name's Lucy, a 30-year-old office worker, and for the past 3 years, I've been with someone special, Alan. He's a genuine gentleman who not only treats me with kindness but deeply cares for me. We first crossed paths in college. He was my senior, and I often turned to him for advice on work or personal matters. He always listened intently and offered wise counsel. As we transitioned into the working world, we kept in touch, meeting regularly. Then, one day, he confessed his feelings and we embarked on a relationship. Since then, our journey together has been blissful, filled with shared moments and dreams of a future together. Then came the day when Alan popped the question, "Lucy, I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Yes, we both agreed, and the decision to tie the knot was made. Swiftly, we shared the news with our families. "Nice to meet you. I'm Lucy," I introduced myself warmly. "Oh, so we finally meet. Alan has talked a lot about you," his mother exclaimed with a smile. "You're just as lovely as he described," I replied, feeling the hint of shyness. "Don't sell yourself short. Come on in, make yourself at home," she insisted kindly. "Thank you," I said gratefully. Alan had lost his father a few years back, leaving only his mother in the family home. I was anxious about meeting her, but she greeted me with open arms. Over tea and snacks, we engaged in a delightful conversation, easing any worries I had about fitting into the family. "Lucy, you're truly a remarkable person. I couldn't be happier that you'll be joining Alan as his wife, my mother-in-law to be praised, her kind words catching me off guard and leaving me slightly flustered. I'm eagerly anticipating your wedding. Take care, Mom. Thank you for today, I replied, bidding her farewell. As our meeting concluded on a positive note, a sense of relief washed over me. However, the thought of introducing Alan to my own family immediately dampened my spirits. The truth is, I've never been particularly fond of my own family. The root of this issue stems from the way my parents treated me throughout my childhood. Both of them were star athletes. Mom excelled in track and field, while Dad dominated the soccer field. Their athletic prowess earned them scholarships to college, and naturally, they expected the same level of athletic achievement from their children. Unfortunately, I didn't possess the same athletic talents they did. Despite their efforts to nurture my sporting abilities by enrolling me in various activities like basketball, swimming, table tennis, and even figure skating, I remained average at best. It was evident that my parents were disappointed by my lack of athletic prowess. Then came the arrival of my younger brother Kyle. With aspirations of having a son, my parents eagerly enrolled him in sports as well. It turned out that Kyle had a natural talent for soccer. When the local youth coach praised his abilities, my parents were overjoyed and redirected all their attention towards him. Kyle is truly exceptional. He's something truly special, they would gush, their words implying my inadequacy. It seemed as though it was nothing more than a disappointment in their eyes. They lavished Kyle with attention and neglected me, even as I progressed through middle and high school. While I dedicated myself to my studies and excelled academically, they dismissed my achievements, claiming that academic success held no real value. When I expressed my desire to attend college, they brushed it off, citing financial constraints, so I relied on scholarships to pursue higher education. Meanwhile, Kyle continued to thrive in soccer, earning himself a scholarship to high school. My parents couldn't contain their excitement. He's destined for greatness. We'll do anything for Kyle. Growing up in the shadow of such adoration, Kyle began to look down on me. Lucy, you're such a failure and a curse. Even Mom and Dad can't stand you. If you weren't around, they could invest all their resources in me. You're just dragging us down. Kyle's hurtful words were a regular occurrence, and my parents never intervened to correct him. You truly are a burden. Spending money on you is just a waste, echoed their sentiment, further crushing my already fragile self-esteem. Despite managing to secure admission to a decent college and landing a job at a reputable company, my sense of worth remained battered, perpetually overshadowed by Kyle's accomplishments. He effortlessly earned yet another soccer scholarship for college, and my parents beamed with pride. Meanwhile, I was struggling to make ends meet, burdened by student loan debt. While Kyle continued to bask in the warmth of parental affection, living at home, pursuing his education, and indulging in soccer, the road to professional success proved arduous. Eventually, Kyle's dreams of going pro fizzled out, and he had to settle for a regular job. Yet my parents remained steadfast in their pride, and Kyle continued to enjoy the comforts of home, content in his own bubble. Every Christmas when our extended family gathered, my parents insisted on my presence. They would introduce me as their disappointing daughter while lavishing praise upon Kyle, their pride and joy. But Lucy is thriving, she has a stable job, relatives would interject. No, Kyle is far more impressive. My parents would dismiss their comments, leaving me disheartened each time. It became a pattern. My family's consistent favoritism towards my brother, their disregard for my achievements. Eventually, I stopped attending these gatherings altogether. I avoided family events and hesitated to introduce my fiancé to them, knowing how they would treat him. Despite being aware of my family's attitude, Alan insisted on a family meeting. So, after years of avoidance, I made the decision to return home. I called my mom to share the news. What? No, how have you been? Or it's been too long. Her response was devoid of warmth or interest, a stark reminder of how little I mattered in their eyes, even after all this time. It's been years since you reached out. What's the matter now? My mom's voice came through, devoid of any warmth. Well, I'm getting married, and my fiancé wants to meet the family. Could we arrange that? I stuttered nervously. Why bother with all that hassle? Just tie the knot and be done with it. Her response was disappointingly cold. Just as I was processing her words, Kyle's voice cut in. Mom, who are you talking to? He inquired. It's Lucy. She's talking about having a family meeting because she's getting married. Really? That sounds amusing. I'd love to see who this guy is. Let's invite them, Kyle chimed in, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Fine, if Kyle insists, my mom relented, her tone lacking enthusiasm. All right, you can come for the meeting, she added, a hint of obligation in her voice. After overhearing their conversation, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Despite their lukewarm invitation, I reasoned that they did express some desire to see me. So, on my next day off, I made the decision to visit my family. Just be prepared for the worst. They might not treat you well, Alan cautioned me. Yeah, I understand. But from that brief phone call, it sounds like you have quite the family dynamic, I replied, trying to lighten the mood. This isn't a laughing matter. I've had my fair share of struggles with them, Alan reminded me solemnly. I insist on meeting your family before we tie the knot. We'll keep it brief, all right? I urged Alan as we drove to my family home. Upon arriving, we rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Resorting to my key, I let us in. As we entered the living room, I was taken aback to find my family seated on the sofa. What surprised me even more was the presence of an unfamiliar young woman. Deciding to start with a simple greeting, I spoke up. Hello, everyone. It's been a while. This is my fiancé, Alan. Pleasure to meet you all. I introduced Alan, prompting my family's gaze to shift towards him. Well, I half expected Lucy to bring home some dull, unremarkable fellow, but you seem all right, Kyle remarked crudely, eliciting an awkward chuckle from Alan. Kyle, who's the woman next to you? Your girlfriend? I couldn't hide my irritation at Kyle for bringing an unexpected guest to our pre-planned family gathering. But Kyle's response caught me off guard. She's my wife, Mia. We've been living here since we got married. He dropped the bombshell casually. What? Wife? My eyes widened in disbelief. You got married. I was stunned, the news hitting me like a ton of bricks. Yeah, last year, Kyle confirmed, seemingly unfazed. I was left speechless, grappling with the realization that my own brother had tied the knot without even informing me. As I tried to process this revelation, my raised voice drew Mom's annoyance. You're too nosy. It's none of your business if Kyle got married, she snapped, brushing off my concerns. I felt a mix of hurt and betrayal. Dad then turned his attention to Alan, ignoring the tension in the room. I'm not particularly interested, but what do you do for a living? You're marrying Lucy, so it can't be anything impressive, but let's hear it, he remarked bluntly. Alan's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with my rising anger. As I clenched my fists in frustration, Alan gently restrained me, reminding me not to let their words get to me. I apologize for any rudeness. Here's my card, Alan said, extending his business card to Dad, who initially regarded it with little interest. However, his expression quickly changed. You're a lawyer, Dad exclaimed, his eyes widening in surprise. Mom, Kyle, and Maya shared in the astonishment. Wow, that's impressive. Elizabeth, prepare some tea for our guests, would you? I'll handle it, Dad declared, suddenly hospitable. A real lawyer, how fascinating, he mused as the atmosphere in the room shifted. Alan couldn't help but be taken aback by the sudden change in attitude. I never would have guessed Lucy's fiancé was a lawyer, Kyle remarked, echoing the sentiment shared by the others. Does that mean you make a lot of money? Maybe you can buy me a designer bag for my birthday, Maya chimed in, her audacity leaving me speechless. It was astonishing that she would make such requests to Alan upon their first meeting. Nevertheless, Alan responded with a wry smile, handling the situation with grace. Alan, you really shouldn't be saying such things to my fiancé, especially on our first meeting. Alan responded with a wry smile, addressing me as bold comments. We're going to be family, so let's try to get along, Mom interjected, attempting to diffuse the tension. However, I couldn't shake off the sense of unease that lingered within me. As the families gathered for a joint meeting, both my parents and Kyle's family exhibited an unusual level of enthusiasm. Even my mother-in-law appeared somewhat taken aback by their fervor. Following the meeting, I took the opportunity to apologize to my mother-in-law, only to discover that Alan had already informed her of the incident. Don't worry about it, she reassured me with a smile, instantly alleviating my concerns. It was a moment of relief, reaffirming my belief in her genuine kindness. 2 months later, Alan and I exchanged vows with my previously indifferent family in attendance. Surprisingly, after the wedding, they began reaching out to us more frequently. Why don't you and Alan join us for dinner sometime? We know this wonderful restaurant, Mom's voice would chirp over the phone. I couldn't shake the suspicion that they were eyeing Alan's money, given his profession as a lawyer. But I wasn't about to fall for their scheme. We're tied up at the moment, so we can't commit to anything right now. We'll keep you posted when we're available, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Sure, we'll be eagerly waiting. We're flexible with our schedule, Mom responded, her enthusiasm palpable. I felt a surge of disgust. It was clear they were more interested in exploiting my marriage to a wealthy man than in building a genuine relationship with me. After maintaining distance for some time, Mom called again a few months later. When are you and Alan going to join us for dinner, Lucy? Mom's voice dripped with false sweetness, and I could practically feel her desperation through the phone. Sorry, Mom, we're pretty swamped, I replied curtly, already contemplating ending the call. But before I could, she dropped a bombshell. We're planning to celebrate my half-century birthday, she continued, her tone shifting slightly. After all, your father and I did see you through high school. It wouldn't hurt to show a little gratitude. I could feel her frustration mounting, expecting us to start treating her differently. But deep down, I couldn't deny that she had a point. After all, my parents had supported me until I graduated college, even if I'd paid my own way through it. Perhaps it was time to show a bit of gratitude. As Mom hit the big 5-0, I relented. All right, count us in for the celebration. Really? That's fantastic. We're actually planning a family trip, so it'll be perfect for all of us to spend time together. A family vacation, huh? I mused, not entirely enthusiastic about the idea. But then I realized it could be an opportunity to enjoy some quality time alone with Alan. When I brought up the idea to Alan, he was on board, so we decided to join the family trip. Mom's reaction was pure excitement. Could you handle the reservations? I'll send you a bunch of URLs for hotels and plans, Mom requested eagerly. What? Mom inundated me with URLs, all pointing to luxury hotels and high-end restaurants. I couldn't help but feel irked by their extravagance, but I reasoned that this might be a one-time indulgence. Reluctantly, I checked out the links and proceeded with the bookings. When I called Mom to confirm the reservations, her joy was palpable. I can't wait, thank you so much, she exclaimed, brimming with excitement. At last, the long-awaited day for our half-century family vacation had arrived, and our destination was sunny Florida. Excitement filled the air as we boarded the plane, with everyone in high spirits. Both my parents and Kyle, along with his partner, seemed to be thoroughly enjoying themselves. On touchdown, Alan and I made it clear to the family that we intended to explore on our own. Despite their attempts to persuade us to join them for souvenir shopping, we managed to gracefully evade the invitation and set off on our own adventure. We arranged to reconvene for dinner at the upscale restaurant we had reserved. As Alan and I wandered the city, taking in its sights and sounds, time seemed to slip away effortlessly. Eventually, we made our way to the fancy restaurant where our parents and Kyle's family were already waiting. You're late, Mom chimed in sharply as we approached. Well, we still have 10 minutes until our reservation, Alan calmly pointed out. Suddenly, their demeanor shifted. We were talking to you, Mom retorted curtly. What? Our business is with Alan, not you. Mom's words cut through the air, her tone sharp and dismissive. Thank you for covering the expenses for this lavish dinner and hotel stay, Dad added, his gratitude directed solely towards Alan. Alan looked bewildered, while Kyle and the others turned their attention to me. You're finished here, Lucy. You don't deserve any of this. You're nothing but a burden, Kyle spat out angrily. What are you even talking about? I tried to reason, but their voices rose in unison. Get out of here, you jobless loser. You have no place on this trip. They berated me, their words dripping with disdain. Disgusted by my family's treatment, I realized their intentions to exclude me from the beginning. So this is how it's going to be, I thought to myself, feeling a surge of determination. You'll regret this. Without another word, I leaned in close to Alan and whispered, Fine, I'll leave now. Our parents and Kyle's family looked smug as they entered the restaurant with Alan. I remarked bitterly. Quickly, I made alternate arrangements. Thankfully, a decent hotel had a last-minute cancellation, so I secured a room and checked in. Settling into a cozy lounge with a picturesque view, I indulged in a cup of coffee to soothe my frayed nerves. It wasn't long before Kyle's call interrupted my moment of peace. What did you do, Lucy? Alan's gone, Kyle's voice sounded frantic. I have no idea. You know Alan, he's usually clueless but sharp when it counts, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. Sure, but this is different. I told him I'm staying at another hotel, so he should join me, Kyle explained. Whenever you're kidding, Kyle, I retorted, feeling a surge of irritation. Kyle abruptly ended the call, leaving me to ponder the situation. Soon after, Alan appeared at my hotel, a mischievous grin adorning his face. Did it work? Were they mad? I asked eagerly. Yeah, they were furious. They're hopeless, Alan replied, shaking his head in disbelief. You were going to foot the bill, and they still acted like that, I exclaimed incredulously. Even Alan was taken aback by their behavior. We brushed it off and decided to treat ourselves to a meal at the hotel's fancy restaurant. Returning to our room, we unwound and woke up feeling rejuvenated the next morning. Eager to explore, we embarked on a sightseeing adventure. Wanting to avoid traveling back with our parents, we opted to change our flight to an earlier one. While waiting for our flight, Mom's furious voice pierced through the phone. Hello, what's going on? I thought you didn't require my assistance, I answered calmly. What's the meaning of this? Why is the hotel bill due at checkout? Mom demanded angrily. That's how I made the reservation. Don't joke around, I replied, trying to maintain composure. We can't afford $11,000 per person. If you're enjoying luxury, you should cover the expenses. Unless you want to end up in jail, Mom snapped back. Stop it. You're so arrogant for a parasite, she spat out before ending the call. You're the one who needs to stop. I had every intention of covering all the expenses for this trip as a gesture of gratitude for all the years you've supported me. But you ruined it by kicking me out, I asserted firmly. Wait, you were going to pay for everything. Mom's voice wavered with disbelief. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you, I affirmed. There's no way you could afford something like that, Mom countered skeptically. Don't underestimate me. I work at the headquarters of a major corporation and hold a managerial position. I earn significantly more than Dad and have substantial savings, I explained calmly. Really? Mom was left speechless, but at that point, it hardly mattered. I had made my decision to sever ties completely. I have to board the plane now, so goodbye, I stated, ending the conversation abruptly. Wait, hold on, I muttered before swiftly ending the call and blocking all their numbers. Fortunately, they were unaware of our address or workplaces, preventing any unexpected visits. However, my Nave family made a reckless move by storming the law firm listed on Alan's business card. Their disruptive behavior led to chaos, with Kyle even causing damage to office equipment, resulting in their arrest. After indulging in an extravagant family trip, they now face the consequences of their actions, hefty damages and fines to pay. Dad and Kyle were subsequently terminated from their jobs, and now they all struggle to make ends meet with part-time employment, trapped in a cycle of poverty and constant conflict. It's a stark lesson in reaping what you sow. On the other hand, Alan and I continue to lead a contented life. I'm overjoyed to announce that I'm expecting, and we recently welcomed our beautiful daughter into the world, celebrating the momentous occasion with my supportive mother-in-law. Moving forward, I intend to cherish my true family, Alan, my mother-in-law, and our daughter, and embrace a life filled with happiness and fulfillment. My name is Ava, and I am 34 years old. I live with my husband James, and we both work for the company founded by my father-in-law. Although he is now retired, my father-in-law single-handedly transformed a small construction firm into an enterprise generating $250 billion in annual revenue. He even acquired rival companies, and while his methods could be forceful, everyone admired his remarkable business acumen. James, chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised in a pampered environment and possesses a gentle nature. However, I fear his gentleness isn't suited for the cutthroat world of business. While gentle may sound pleasant, in reality, he is incredibly indecisive. I've started to doubt his suitability as a husband, let alone a CEO. James himself has admitted, I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way. His lack of serious intention to take over the company has left me frustrated after 5 years of marriage. In stark contrast to James, I consider myself quite decisive. During his active years, my father-in-law appreciated this quality in me and entrusted me with various tasks. Before marrying James, I worked at a bank where I managed finances and always kept numbers in mind. I planned to become a full-time homemaker after our wedding, but my father-in-law requested that I join the construction company instead. Soon after I started working there, he began inviting me to board meetings and seeking my opinions on management matters. Initially, the board members were skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in such important discussions. However, as I consistently offered valuable insights, they began to listen to my suggestions. Despite James being a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was accepted as the norm by the board and my father-in-law. One day, after returning home from a meeting, I found James nonchalantly watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked. I asked angrily, "You're a key member, you should take it seriously." Without showing any remorse, he retorted, "Even if I attend, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wondered if he was irritated by my participation in the board meetings. Despite his remarks, my father-in-law had been teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seemed to be grooming me as his successor. I had started enjoying my involvement in management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to meet my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. Whenever there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me while James was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would spur James to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he would disappear somewhere by noon and stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was tasked with duties akin to those of a CEO. Given that we were a large company with many employees, I was committed to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversations between us at home lessened, and our relationship became increasingly tense. Around that time, our lives took a different turn. James came home and casually mentioned, "I ran into your sister Megan today and we had lunch together." Megan, 2 years older than me, had just divorced about 6 months ago due to her infidelity. This led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home. My husband, James, went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband in my place as I was busy with work. With his gentle upbringing and calming personality, James managed to convince Megan's furious husband to leave for the time being. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised James. Megan's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by James' calm and easygoing demeanor. Megan was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but since this incident, she seemed to look at James differently. Until then, she had thought of James, who was not particularly attractive and quite indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. After the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Now single after her divorce, Megan probably saw James as a great catch, given her love for wealthy men. However, I, engrossed in work, couldn't imagine such a thing. Of course, my sister wouldn't have known that James is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company. At their wedding, she had bragged to me, "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after hearing from James that he had lunch with Megan, I returned home to find James unusually serious. "I have something to discuss," he said. It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad premonition. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Megan was pregnant. At a loss for words, I listened as James continued, "Megan is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you." Stunned, I asked, "So you want to marry my sister?" With a troubled look, James responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James' typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business, but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled at the news of her son having a child but quickly quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. She seemed more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Ava, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do what he likes." It seemed that my father-in-law valued the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a strong voice in the company, and since he held most of the company's shares, no executives would go against his will. I was also interested in my work and reluctant to give it up now. With my job settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile. "Ava, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately," she said with a triumphant air. My husband sat silently, listening to our conversation without saying anything despite being the one who caused the problem. I was appalled at his indifferent face. "It's okay to get divorced," I said, "but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. Let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly. I never thought you, my sister, would fall for a man like James." I retorted to my sister with irony. She glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized that it's not about looks in men, it's about what's inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk as if she fully understood my husband's inner self. Holding back my laughter, I replied, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." The inner self my sister was talking about was likely money. She seemed to be under the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company. Though I only took out the necessary items, knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and claims for alimony. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still present that day, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience." Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister in addition to my husband. My sister was still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as I wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, "This mansion is originally James's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right?" The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly, "This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide." Even my husband seemed surprised by this. "Is that so? I thought this house was Dad's," he said casually. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and attacked the lawyer. "Wait a minute, so does that mean I can't live in this house?" The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner, "Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it." At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here." The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. "What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James." Seeing my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband yet didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, "Ha, James, you're not the president." I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, "James is merely an advisor without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, but it was also made president. Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, But when he retired, he made me an executive director and president. The other executives appreciated my performance, so there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights, which is more of a pity than a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So, I was bearing all the living expenses. James, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even bother to know whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. I thought of it as a normal rental property. The lawyer, still laughing, asked me, "Can we continue to rent this house to James?" My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. "What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free." The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. "Guess a house this big does have a high rent," he muttered. "I can't afford that with my salary," James admitted, realizing his executive compensation would barely leave any money after paying the rent. Covering their living expenses would be hard. Over the 5 years of our marriage, James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expenses, leaving hardly any assets. Splitting the savings was the only option for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, now aware that the mansion she had hoped for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, "Why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news." James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man, who was about to be my ex, this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, "Are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seem pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. "Alimony? I have to pay it too." She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the earlier discussion. "You said, 'I'll give plenty of alimony,' but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary is really low." James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents. Seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James, and I was paid in full. But my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, "Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well?" To this, the father-in-law responded, "I have no reason to be called Dad by you." He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister and was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core of my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone after the breakup. I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.